this telecast?
Smile. That's why I put you there.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Because I have to leave.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Exempt Setting Committee. And today is November 3rd, and the time now is 12:38, and we are in Embassy Suites in Anaheim, Orange County. And I think for the time, Christina, would you please call to establish a quorum?
Yes. Good afternoon. Christina Wong,
Yes.
Betty Conley,
Yes.
Deborah Brown.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you very much. So let's go ahead and do introduction, and I'll start with my right.
Christy Berger, Regulatory Analyst for the Board.
Roseanne Helms, Legislative Analyst for the Board.
Sabina Knight, Legal Counsel.
Christina Wong, LCSW member.
Kim Madsen, Executive Officer for the Board.
Betty Conley, LEP member.
Deborah Brown, public member.
Steve Sodergren, Assistant Executive Officer of the Board.
And the audience, if you choose to, please introduce yourself.
Rebecca Gonzalez, National Association of Social Workers, California chapter.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mike Griffin from California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists.
Thank you very much. So I would like to move the agenda out of order. So for now, let's do public comments for items not on the agenda. And I think we have one. For the time, we let our the chair of our board, Deborah Brown, come and present the resolution for Ms. Pine, for Ms. Carrie Pine.
Ms. Pines, would you please come forward? You can just go right here. There we go. Right. Okay. Would you stand right here so you can get on camera? We have a resolution for you, and we're very glad that you could come today. Very glad. And I'm going to read it real quickly, if that's okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Whereas Karen Pines, LMFT, faithfully served as a member of the California State Board of Behavioral Sciences from April 5th, 2011 to June 1st, 2017. During your tenure with the board, you served one term as the board's vice chair and was instrumental in reforming the board's continuing ed program. You have, throughout your years of service, you have fully given of yourself and your ideas. You've acted forthrightly, conscientiously, and always with the public interest and welfare in mind. You have discharged these important responsibilities in a manner reflecting great credit upon yourself and the board. Whereas her colleagues wish to express to her with their high esteem and regard. Now, therefore, be it resolved this third day of November 2017 that the members of the California State Board of Behavioral Sciences express heartfelt appreciation to Karen Pines for the outstanding contribution you have made during your term of office to the service of this board. Thank you again, Karen. Long service, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
This is low. Thank you very much for this. I will bring it.
Thank
good.
you.
Love it.
Thank you so much.
Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. You can always find us on www.
BBS.ca.gov.
Better part of 3 days on that.
Yeah. So if you ever really want to touch base, you can tune in.
Okay.
And thank you so much for driving, coming
Yes.
down to Orange County
You just
to
don't
see us.
realize how far 10 miles is.
Yes.
Yes.
We truly appreciate you driving down here.
I appreciate you putting time aside.
Oh,
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you so much, Karen.
Good to
Yes.
see
And
you.
this is my committee, Exempt.
That's right.
That was one of the things I did, is I kept bothering about,
Yes, you did.
and so here you are. Thank you.
Thank you
you.
very much. So the next agenda item is for Christy to share with us the survey regarding the practice setting for our licensees. So I'm going to hand it to Christy.
Yeah, so this is for the students who are in a degree program who are looking to pursue licensure for the board. So we surveyed the schools, the practicum coordinators of the schools. Right now we have over 100 LMFT and LCC programs, many of which are dual track, that's why I combined the number. And then 23 CSW programs in the state. So we got a total of 76 responses. And it was voluntary and anonymous, but we did email directly each and every program trying to get a response. We asked that only one educator per degree program complete the survey and that person be directly involved in coordinating placements. Before we get into the survey results, I want to just kind of refresh the committee about the laws pertaining to practicum and fieldwork placements. LMFT and LPCC are identical, except for that, one thing to keep in mind is that LMFT students can count pre-degree hours toward licensure. So the school has to approve each site. The school must have a written agreement with each site, and it's the law is pretty, we specify certain things, but the agreements we've seen are very detailed, detailing the responsibilities of the site, the supervisor, and the student, and the school. And the setting must be lawfully and regularly provide mental health counseling or psychotherapy, must provide oversight to ensure that the student's work at the setting meets the experience requirements and supervision requirements and was within the scope, and cannot be a private practice. The social work law does not have those requirements except that you cannot work in a private practice if you're doing clinical work. And we also, attachment A has some of the sample written agreements. So it just might be helpful as we go through survey results and think about where we want to go with those current requirements. So in terms of the responses to the survey, about 50% of the survey responses were from the dual track LMFT, LPCC programs. The rest were a combination of either single LMFT, single LPCC, or LCSW. The 80% of the programs were primarily traditional classroom-based. 78 has some now, so that's generally who the responses came from. Now we're getting into the details of some information about the students and the settings where they work. Found that 78% of students are unpaid in their practicum placement. That was based on an estimate from the school. What percentage of their students receive pay? So 78% are not paid, but some are. The top 3 most common placement settings where students are doing clinical services are exempt settings. They don't have to be an exempt setting, but the 3 most common are, so nonprofit and charitable, public schools, and governmental agencies. About 40% of programs place students performing clinical services in for-profit entities that are not private practices. So some for-profit entities are acceptable, but that's one of the things that is not well defined. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. In terms of how student placements are, what's the process for placing a student? About 50% of the programs, the school and the student share the responsibility of finding a suitable placement for the student. So they work on that together. They do that in different ways. And if you look at the survey results, there's a little bit of narrative about how that's generally done. Some schools, I think, do more vetting of the sites than others. Some put more responsibility on the student, but generally, in most cases, it's both. We asked the educators, what are the most important qualities of a suitable practicum setting? So the top 3 came out as effective supervision, quality learning and training opportunities available, and exposure to a diverse spectrum of clients or experiences. About 40% of respondents indicated that there are certain types of settings allowed by law that they feel are not suitable for students to be placed in. And of those who provided an explanation, not everybody did, but most described settings that are either limited in scope, such as maybe they only provide substance abuse treatment, or they're just solely a crisis center. So they don't have exposure and aren't necessarily able to do a lot of mental health clinical treatment. Or they also talked about organizations that have some ethical issues or that are unstable. So they didn't really describe settings in terms of, whether it's a school or a nonprofit and charitable. They talked about some of the qualities of the settings that might be problematic. And I think that probably the schools weed those out as they're looking at them. We asked a question about whether
they feel it's necessary to use some extra precaution when placing students in certain types of settings. And so about 70% said, yeah, there are settings where we do use some extra precaution, and those tend to be those that treat the severely mentally ill or clients who are very high risk. So they might use some extra vetting on their students when they're looking at placement in those types of settings. But on the converse side, that means there's 30% of schools that don't believe that there are settings where it's necessary to use extra precautions. So that was a little bit baffling to me, and it may have had to do with how the question was worded. So, because it's hard for me to imagine that there wouldn't be some process for that. We asked them what are the factors that might lead you to decide against placing students at a particular site? And the number one factor was that they would be lacking or in supervision or monitoring or have poor supervision or monitoring. And looking at the number of placements available for students, about 30% of schools do not have enough placements available for their students. So in those kind of cases, the students might have to do more of the footwork in looking for a placement, and then maybe they have to go outside of the region and get those created. And this is what I found very interesting is that the respondents estimated that about 32% of their students continue on at their site after graduation. Okay, so the next question we asked is, the board sets forth the requirements about placement of students, and the ones that I went over earlier. So we asked them, what are the most common types of issues that you encounter when you're, looking at the BBS requirements and trying to determine if a site is suitable? So, so when they're trying to apply our requirements, what are the issues that come up? So, the ones that came up. We asked, are there questions or issues? I think the question was trying to get at, do they have problems in applying the board's requirements? But some of the answers that came back don't quite fit that, but I included it here anyway. So I guess one of the issues is that the site might not understand what are the requirements for a qualified supervisor. Mm-hmm. Or the site might not understand the requirements for counting hours towards licensure. And then this last one is more of dealing with BBS requirements in terms of whether a school can figure out if a placement is suitable is whether a for-profit agency, we don't have a definition of private practice, so they do use for-profit agencies, but they don't know really how to determine when those are acceptable. Where's sort of that dividing line? What are those things that should be looked for? So it's a frequent question that we get. Apparently the board used to have a list of the types of settings that were available, and then the definition was changed. So, were there any questions on the survey results? This was just a selection, of the more significant responses. The full survey results are in the attachment. So,
This is very good. And we have a good response rate of close to about half.
Yeah.
So that's, so I would say that this definitely represents, a good representation of what's out there, in terms of the few placement for the 3 license types. So thank you so much, Christy, for your work on that. So I'm going to open up to the board members. Any comments about the survey results? Any questions? Public?
It's done well.
It's done really well, yeah.
Very good
Go ahead,
job.
Mike.
The survey is really, it's great, all the detail, and it's really helpful. A couple recurrent issues that come up that you cited in the survey are trying to arrive at a clear and unambiguous definition of a private practice. Mm-hmm. And then the topic of what's an acceptable for-profit setting. I mean, the attorneys get lots of calls about, is this an okay setting? And frankly, that's the question when it comes up with these variations of for-profit settings are the ones that we struggle with the most. I mean, as an example, I had a call recently and I didn't have all the details on it from the prospective supervisor, but said it was a hospice setting that was nationwide, that was for-profit. Is that okay? And I was struggling with having a clear answer on that, and then I was talking with the other attorneys, and we were all struggling together. And then I think in looking at a list that apparently was generated some years ago in collaboration between the board and staff, it had some provisions on it about the necessity of there being a license from the state. And that's what I ended up saying to the caller, but then I can't find any legal authority that says that is precisely. So I thought I'd bring that back and say if we could work on that, or getting a list that's more precise, but particularly on that issue. So thanks.
And I think that's definitely, affirmed, the very beginning when we started the committee, that the need to clarify or to further define, what really is private practice, exempt setting, and what is not private practice, and what is for profit. So we have all these terminologies to really, struggle. And actually, I really love one of the comments. I can't remember which survey that, that bringing back way back when all these listing, specifically say what is, the examples of, the nonprofit organization, something like that. So I think, that's definitely, looks like that's the direction we should be going, is to further the clarification of the definition.
Definitely, and actually, when we get to the next agenda item, the exempt setting survey that we did, we purposely asked for information about different types of work settings. So I think will actually help inform this.
Yes.
The research we do to try to build that definition.
Definitely.
Or make the list, or however we're going to approach it.
Definitely. And Roseanne, you have a comment?
I was just going to say, in regard to the issue that Mike brought up, I strongly, as staff, I strongly second that that's a major issue.
Yes, yes. And it looks like to me that, the focus of the school, apart from the definition, it's really about supervision slash supervisor, the quality and I don't know if, and I know, Christy, you made some recommendation, to talk about, the possibility of, clarifying the setting, allowing, for the clinical practice and things like that. So, do you want to further elaborate or?
Sure, yeah, I'd like to go through that, what some of the, what some suggestions, some directions that the committee may wish to have us look at. So, creating a definition of private practice,
right.
And we already have a definition of settings that are exempt, but we also need a definition for settings that don't fit either of those definitions. So that's one thing, and I don't know that it would be easy to define that third group. Is it all one thing? Is it more than one? I think that for-profit, non-private practice maybe encompasses those things. I'm not sure. We can do some more work on that. Determining whether there's a need to change or clarify the types of settings allowable for students. It sounds like there is a need for that. One thing, we have wondered about our for-profit entity. Private practices are not acceptable. Is a for-profit entity, is it okay? And or is it okay in certain situations? I think there needs to be, if we are going to continue to accept a for-profit entity, maybe we need to tease out what qualities does a for-profit entity need to have in order to be, because there's all different types of structures. You also have to, all that they have to go by right now is that the setting is lawfully and regularly provide mental health counseling or psychotherapy. They have to provide oversight. So I think some more guidance along those lines would be helpful. Another thing we could look at, I don't know if it's necessary, but is there a need to change or clarify the school's responsibilities regarding placement or monitoring of students in the field? And also just really important to note here that we do not regulate MSW programs and any of that other than, again, clinical services can't be provided in private practice by students. That's one of the reasons I included some sample written agreements. I only got from a handful of schools. So not every school maybe has the amount of rigor, but again, most of them I would think do because it's, they have a lot of responsibility for their students and placing them. So, but it is a question. Do you want me to investigate that further? Look at some additional written agreements, that type of thing. So that's one thought as well. And I think the other reason that question came up for me is we did have that one question where 70% of schools use extra precaution when placing students in certain settings. It bothered me a little bit that that probably should have been
100% instead of 73%.
Yeah, so that was a
70%.
was a little bit concerning. And we are dealing with some schools who are tiny. We have some that are they're state approved, they're not accredited. I think more and more are moving to regional accreditation or Department of Education accreditation, but some of them are really, really tiny. So that's another thought. And the last question is, are there any needs to change this or clarify the site supervisors or practicum supervisors' responsibilities regarding students performing clinical work? Again, we have the written agreement. I just want to go back to the written agreement. What our law says is the written agreement has to be with the site, so between the school and the site, that details each party's responsibilities, including the methods for supervision. The agreement shall provide for regular progress reports and evaluations of student performance at the site. So that's as far as we go, but these agreements that at the schools that I looked at are very comprehensive. Pages, 4 pages long, it seems like, is the minimum, sometimes in some cases longer. So those are thoughts that I had.
Betty, any comments?
No, I mean, there's a few troubling things that we don't have any control over, that the fact that there's that many schools that can't find placements, or 30% of students can't find placements, 30% of schools do not have enough placements available. But I don't know that that's anything we have any control over.
Right.
I mean, I think it's certainly speaks to something that.
So I'm thinking that now. So I think, the 4 recommendation, I'm looking at the first one. We just dealt with it and looks like, that's the direction we want to go. And I'm thinking that now. So currently, only LMFT trainees are allowed to collect the hours.
Correct.
And then trainees not under our jurisdiction. And yet the supervisors are. Right?
For MFT,
For
yes,
the
they are.
MFT.
For the other 2 professions, so for LPCC, their trainees can't count the hours for licensure. They count towards their practicum. We do have some authority, a little bit of authority over those trainees. Social work is hands-off completely.
Right.
So completely different.
So I'm just thinking that now, because this is, we're trying to deal with, the issue coming from the exempt setting. So I'm thinking that, and it looks like, thinking about the setting, allowable, for student in a clinical practicum, since, it has to be lawful, for us, for actually, for the student to be able to, to count those hours. So it seems to me that, it's important that to clarify, what settings are, not really allowable, but, I wonder if we have the authority to say that it's, I'm thinking that, whether it would be better to give them guidelines, that this is clearly, what we want, for the practicum, but then instead of saying that you should or should not, allow that site, specific site, I think it's important that we kind of, leave that job to, to the school. But at the same time, it's important that, we give that, like I said, given that guidelines and a definition.
Christina?
Yes.
In terms of that, I'm also concerned about the fact that there are 30% of as Christine pointed out, that are potentially placing their students in settings that could present a risk to the public, could be compromising situations. And so I don't know whether we want to consider adding some language that could potentially be a public protection and a trainee protection, but clearly if they're working with severely mentally ill or high risk clients, that would not be something that we'd necessarily, I mean, we would want to say that that may or may not be appropriate for a trainee.
Right.
I would agree with that. I don't understand why you would, somebody who's just learning a profession, why you would put them in a high-risk situation
Right.
where they don't have, and they're under supervision, yes, and they've had some education, but when you think about who treats these folks, typically, they have years of experience.
Right.
Just sounds like it's really dangerous
Yeah.
for several of the people involved.
Some of the comments, the written comments, open-ended that I got did address that, and then talked about students coming in with different levels of experience. They might have already been a peer counselor or have some sort of experience to where they do feel comfortable. But again, that's probably not the most common, you know.
Even,
That's unusual.
some experience, that leaves me feeling very uncomfortable. And it seems like it leaves some populations at risk. So if we could make some note about that, I think it would be
Again, we have to
appropriate.
keep in mind, you know, the sites do interview and screen the students. It is, we also have some places where, site, you know, if they don't have enough sites, so just keeping those things in mind. But public protection is that's our mandate.
Right.
Well, and I honestly think it's a protection for the trainee. Placing in an inappropriate, potentially dangerous site for people involved may not be, I mean, no placement at all, or waiting for a placement may be a better option in the long run, because it could potentially harm both the trainee and the patient. So I have very serious concerns about that.
I'm wondering about, you know, the maybe adding language like, you know, that the safety, you know, the physical safety, you know, is important, you know, something like that. You know, like the social work sites, you know, they've already put in, you know, say like, you know, when they begin their student placement, that, you know, that the agency are required to give them training, you know, about how to deal with the risk and, you know, that kind of the safety stuff. So, you know, so I don't know if you want to go down that route, being that detailed. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I was looking for a Kleenex.
No, they
Yeah, go
can't
ahead.
hear.
In the supervision committee, when we were talking about how much supervision and the amount of attention each in group supervision the person got, it said, we put in some language saying the supervisor shall, you know, tailor the supervision to the needs of the individual supervisor. So we can put in some language, you know, that the site needs, or the school that's doing the placement needs to consider the safety of the clients involved as well as the trainee when considering.
Yeah,
whether it's
that sounds
appropriate
Yeah,
placement.
right.
Yeah.
And so it's
Just to
doable.
kind of think twice, you know, not, it still allows for, okay, that maybe this person has a unique background that makes it appropriate, but, you know, maybe think twice and you're just
Right.
trying to find the site and that one happens to be there.
Right. Absolutely. So that's a possibility to add the language, you know, to just clarify.
She's having issues to hear the whole conversation, so I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay.
Are we now, so are we still on?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so we're still on.
Make sure you just pull your mic closer to you.
Okay. Here's the mic. We need to mic the mic. Okay, that's fine.
Mike, check.
Okay. I will keep talking. So that you can hear.
You talk among yourselves, we believe it.
Oh,
So I
okay.
thought, well, it might just move up a little.
No, absolutely, absolutely.
I think we're the ones that need to adjust, Dean, not you.
It's us.
Apologize.
Yeah, and I apologize for it, you know, just, yeah, okay. So one person talk at a time. Yep, great. So that means that, you know, adding the language to, you know, to make sure, to ensure the safety and stuff, you know, it's doable. Yeah, so, okay, very good. Let's see. So okay, should we just go down, you know, to, you know, the list, huh? So, okay, are we done with the setting allowable for student and clinical practice? So we don't regulate social work students. And so those languages will only appear in the LMFT and the LPCC
If that's what
regulations.
you believe should be done, I think we would have a hard time
With
trying
the,
to,
yeah,
with the social work programs. And they're highly, they're all council and social work
Yes.
education accredited and, highly
Mhm.
monitored. So I would feel comfortable with.
yeah. Feel free to pull the chair up, just like Ian.
Actually, I couldn't hear the very last thing you said, though.
Oh, I was saying, for social work programs, they're highly regulated because they all have to have the CSWE accreditation and, all their accreditation standards, whereas the other professions don't have that type of, some programs do, but not all.
Right. So yeah, Rebecca Gonzalez from NASW, I would agree with that we're probably happy with the way it is.
So now I'm just looking at, Christy, your recommendation to clarify the types of a setting. Right now, do we have languages, or if, let's say, we clarify private practice, exempt setting, nonprofit, all those things that, that would take care of that?
I don't know that it would take care of that, but I think we've discussed some concerns internally about for-profit settings.
Mm-hmm.
I believe the schools have some concerns about for-profit settings, but they don't know, they might know what their concerns are, but they don't know if we feel that they're acceptable. They really vary, they might, there are mental health counseling clinics that are for-profit, sometimes they're employee-owned, or, they have a board of directors, a CEO. But there's different, like the for-profit hospice, that's a good example. But all that, so I think private practices are not allowable because the implication is there's not, it may just be one person working with students, and there's not necessarily a structure in place to really, you can't guarantee that. In an agency setting, I think it's more of a given that you've got an administrative arm, that has rules. You've got, supervisors, but for-profits, we aren't as familiar with the for-profit world. We're getting there. We're getting more familiar. And beyond what is in our current law about it has to be a place that provides mental health psychotherapy, legally does that. And that they provide appropriate supervision, there's nothing else to go on. So you might have, another good example would be a for-profit substance abuse treatment facility.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Is that allowable? They probably do provide mental health counseling, but I don't, beyond that, is it appropriate? So.
I'm wondering if we just hit the definitions, start kind of taking a stab at the definition of the private practice, the definition of, or even just defining criteria about what's acceptable at a for-profit and what maybe a nonprofit. Maybe those two are the same. Maybe that takes care of the issue.
It sounds like it would be a major change in practice to say that we wouldn't allow placements in for-profit agencies. If 40% are getting placed in for-profit agencies, and we're already saying 30% of students don't have enough placements.
Right, and I'm not saying that the definition would make it unacceptable.
Right.
I just think it would just
It would clarify.
It would clarify and address the issue that Mike brought up.
Absolutely.
Because we have the same challenge in the office. They call and, well, is this setting good? Well, we refer you to this point in the law, and if it's, regularly providing mental health services, and it's doing this and this, yeah.
Right.
What about this?
Yeah.
The law's silent. I think that's probably what's occurring, mainly as a result of the change in the settings where people are working. I think initially when you looked at LMFT law, most people hung out their own shingle. That private practice at that point, that's what I think that was meant to address. That's not necessarily the case anymore.
Right.
So,
Roseanne, you have a comment?
Yeah, I think it might be helpful to look at 1 and 2 as two very separate issues. For 2, I think that it might, as a starting point, for the types of settings that are allowable, I think it might be helpful to pull out the old list that existed a long time ago and kind of look at those and work backwards from there, and maybe look at some of the survey settings, the other settings that were reported, and see, once we come up with, sort of look at that list, see if there's anything else that's included in there, and go from there. The private practice and exempt, I see that as kind of a bigger issue than just the trainees, because we have the problem with the private practice. We have that for interns, because you can't work in a private practice, and we have all these other, we have private practice and exempt and corporations, but then there's all these other undefined settings. So that's I kind of see that as a broader issue, and then the trainee setting issue is kind of a sub-issue of that.
Yes.
So
it's very true. And I think that, it's nothing wrong with the for-profit setting. It's really about the nature, the services that are provided. And yet when you have 2 criteria, and our law is silent about that, it just makes it confusing. So maybe we can continue to work on, to really define, I really like, Roseanne, what you said. There's maybe we work backward and see, check it out, that old list, because it did. I think one of the survey, the response really listed that whole different settings. So maybe we can really start from there to see if currently, whether those lists are still applicable.
Yeah.
And then, and if it's really necessary to give the examples, and then we can go from there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. So, any public comments, feedback? Hi, Mike. Come on up.
We appreciate your effort on that, and we're happy to try to collaborate on it, because we've been struggling with this for a while. And I'm not sure if this is the solution. It might be, if we're saying that criteria that makes a for-profit setting acceptable would be that they are a licensed health clinic of some sort, because there's certain features that go with that.
Right.
Then if it's in the regs, then I feel comfortable pointing to it, rather than saying, I think that's probably what we mean.
Yeah.
That might be one way of
That's a nice solution.
I don't think we'd be opposed to that. So,
Yeah.
thanks.
Okay.
Good example. And, that's definitely something to consider. Okay. So number 3. So, whether there's a need to change or clarify the school's responsibilities regarding placement or monitoring of students in the field. So
you gave me the one, looking at using, ensuring the safety.
Right.
Students
Right.
and finances.
So that one would work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so. If there's anything beyond that.
We can see the language and then, continue to enrich it.
Did you want me to explore that a little more, or did you feel like that maybe just that one additional clarification about safety? Or do you want me to gather some, pull some other school agreements? I could do one more. I don't know how far you want me to take that.
I don't know that additional surveys are gonna.
Well, not additional survey, I was just thinking I could ask some more schools
Yes.
for copies of their written agreements and just kind of report back on what I found.
Right.
What might inform us a little bit would be, and I don't know how you get this, but maybe following up, there's 70% of the schools that are very clear about drawing some lines about where they feel it's appropriate to place a trainee.
Yeah.
And that they're clear about saying that they're not going to place them in high-risk situations. And whether they have anything in language or anything in their policies or protocols that kind of define that, that might be useful to inform it going forward for whether we want to look at that.
And I'm also wondering, since, the social work curriculum, we don't touch them, but then they also have a system in place, whether, you can actually, use the kind of like the social work modality, to, pull some of their practice, and maybe we can incorporate into the other 2 licensees, the license type, and then see how, how the social workers have been doing. We can all learn from each other. Oh, Roseanne, go ahead.
It's okay. It's all good now.
Okay. So now you're good. Awesome. Okay, so the last recommendation, Christy, is whether there is a need to change or clarify the site supervisor or practicum supervisor's responsibilities. You have a thought?
Sorry for my comma, but I'm thinking about our supervision bill. I'm wondering if the changes in that bill would address this.
It would for the MFTs.
MFTs,
For
yes.
Mhm.
I think that is a start for the MFTs. I think if the school, I almost think it goes hand in hand with 3. If the school's responsibilities
Right.
are defined and they're making sure that they have a supervisor that, is providing appropriate supervision. I don't know how much further we want to go with that. I think we could maybe draft some language of number 3 and see if we feel that that's sufficient to cover this supervisor.
Right.
Well, and certainly if they had questions, when the supervision bill becomes law, we could point them to that as a model.
Right. See, so Kim, it's not just your food coma. I was actually thinking that this is so relevant to our supervision bill, and I don't really want to bring this to the tables, but at the same time, it is kind of equivalent.
It's kind of a parallel to
It's
it.
parallel,
It's parallel.
right.
It's for at least for LPCCs, it's parallel. For MFTs, it's covered, but
Right.
LPCCs are a little different.
Right. So maybe, I wonder now if since we have so many bills, upcoming, so maybe we can, how about we, just kind of parking lot this one, and then just see, how, when we work on the language, because, the supervision bill is upcoming, in February. And so, and the next time when we meet, we probably have a better idea, what the supervision bill, how it's gonna look like. And then we can see that, staff can probably just look at that and see, if that will suffice, clarifying the LPCC law for the site supervisors.
So I can tell,
Yeah.
so what I can tell you right now is the LPCC law does not put any requirements regarding the license of a site supervisor. They do not require them to have a license. So, for their practicum hours.
But then LPCC also, their hours during their practicum don't count.
They don't count, and that's where I'm not sure that we want to mix that up in AB 93 because we want that to. So AB 93 in February is hopefully going to be able to start moving forward. I don't want to be developing new language to put in there.
No,
for this.
I'm not thinking about, putting, changing any of those things, I think we talked about that in PNA, and this is what it is. We're not touching it right now. But what I'm thinking is that, because that bill is upcoming, and it hasn't really been reintroduced, to the board meeting. So I think it would be good that once it's, come up alive again, that we can look at the language of that bill and see if, that would cover the practicum supervisor, but not really the site supervisor, or the LPCC law, right?
Well, I don't think anything in that bill is touching.
Anything to the
students.
LPCC?
Nothing for students.
Not really, no.
Post-degree only.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So,
So I like the earlier suggestion where we just sort of do a broad statement. Very similar to some of the language we put in the supervisor for the group supervising.
Yes.
So maybe we mirror that language here.
And that
for the
might-
time being.
That might be all we can do because we don't really have a lot of jurisdiction over those sites where, unless they're counting the hours. I mean, they are counting it for practicum, so it's arguable there, but I don't know how much we can really specify for like an LPCC trainee because they're sort of practicing out.
They're still under the school's
Yeah.
oversight.
And maybe we say that the school, should ensure, and I think we kind of do already. The school should ensure the appropriate amount of supervision.
well, what we say is, the agreement has to detail each party's responsibilities, including the methods of supervision, and then there have to be regular progress reports and evaluations. So that implies supervision, but it's not very specific. It doesn't talk about providing adequate supervision and monitoring, really. I mean, it's implied. But maybe we could be a little bit clearer.
More
about-
specific. we could wordsmith that language a little bit to make it a little stronger, shall ensure a certain amount of supervision or offer some sort of so that the schools have something to
base.
Then it helps them with knowing if the site's appropriate or not.
So right now, the site supervisor and the practicum supervisor can be, two different, can be licensees and.
They are different.
Yeah, because they are different, yeah.
Yeah, and they
So-
may or may not be licensees,
Right.
But I do have this, a picture of, in my head, of you have an LPCC student maybe working in a little nonprofit or even in a for-profit. We hear about the nonprofit struggles with getting, affording, supervision and things like that. So, it does make you worry a little bit about maybe what might happen out there, and how much vetting every single school, I know we can't guarantee every single school and every
Yes,
single
exactly.
supervisor, but I think being that our purview is public protection, if we can strengthen some of that language, and maybe we don't require licensure, but they have a clinical supervisor, something that beefs that up a little bit, so we can kind of take a stab at that.
And then take a look at and see if we can enhance, or put some meat into the language.
So I don't know whether this is a comment or a question. So it may be a question to Christy. It sounds like from reading the responses that the number one reason that educational programs stop using a site is because of the lack of supervision or the lack of adequate supervision. So I guess my question is, how much can we dictate or have control over educational entities that are making those decisions? I mean, we're providing guidance, but isn't it pretty much just guidance at this
Yeah.
point? I mean, we don't have any authority over those.
We can't discipline them. I guess
There-
the worst
there's-
that we
yeah.
could do is not accept somebody's degree. It would be against the student.
That
We
would
could
be
not ever-
pretty, that would
really-
be pretty draconian.
It would be ridiculous, yeah. So I think maybe our best thing that we can do is have something that gives guidance, especially the little schools that maybe aren't as experienced and don't have as many connections, so I think, we don't want to go too far with this, but at the same time.
So really what we're doing are talking about guidelines, which is a little different than what we're used to doing. We're used
Correct.
to
That's a good
creating
point.
regulations and things that we can actually have control over. All we're doing here is providing guidance for some of those
For the
entities.
schools, yeah.
Yeah.
And where we can, I think we start there.
And I think if we put some suggested language out there, that the schools will help us by giving some feedback of whether that's helpful or not.
And I suspect we might get feedback from trainees as well.
Yeah. Okay. So, Dean?
I noticed that 87% are using the schools for a practicum site.
Yeah.
And this is something we've discussed and even started to write a white paper because it's problematic. It depends on the school district whether or not the school counselors, and of course that would be any trainee or intern, can actually do psychotherapy in the schools. Many school districts do not allow that to be done. So then what kind of training are they getting in a school setting?
Well,
They're
and-
doing academic advising.
They can
or-
do counseling. They can do counseling related to educational outcomes, but there's nothing to the best of my knowledge, in a PPS counseling credential that even refers to psychotherapy.
Right.
So that's a very different type of language than is used under a school counselor. So I agree with what you're saying.
Our
They certainly-
license is preparing to do psychotherapy.
Psychotherapy, which does, I think that presents a real good question.
So maybe one of the criteria or one of the considerations for guidelines that we put out there is that we're looking at a clinical type placement. But, again, you might be restricting, so.
The
Well-
practicum requirement is that you're doing counseling,
Right.
face-to-face psychotherapy, so that
Yeah.
they have,
They have to do right there.
And maybe, so sometimes schools require you know, they say that they have the COAMP certification. I think I heard it was 600 hours. So it might be that they're doing hours in schools, but they're not necessarily
Counting.
clinical,
Gotcha.
you know, but they're not, you know, they're getting other types of experience.
Okay.
So
And schools do hire LCSWs and MSWs. I mean, that's not impossible that a school would do that.
Right.
Most schools hire PPS counselors.
maybe they're doing other things like running groups, you know, mixed.
And that is absolutely something that would be appropriate in a school setting, but I get Dean's point, that it's not psychotherapy.
And I suppose for the trainee, the school is making that decision, the graduate school, whether this is good experience or not. It may become more problematic at the intern level.
Right. And I think, yes.
So the supervisor really has the responsibility to making sure that, you know, when providing supervision, you know, that the experience, you know, for the intern are really fitting the mental health, you know, guidance. So, you know, so when, you know, I'm wondering if it's, you know, also a possibility to maybe just even reiterate that, you know, that it's not so much about the responsibility, but making sure that, you know, the setting and the opportunity, you know, that for the learning, you know, really is mental health related, or, you know, the kind of the definition, you know, based on our regulations.
So what
It will be
right
the
now
psychotherapy
it says is they have to regularly and lawfully provide mental health counseling or psychotherapy. So the setting
So it's
must,
there.
yeah, so that is there.
Yeah. So when the site supervisor, they sign off the hours and they agree, and then they don't do it, then there's nothing, there's no consequence. And so it's kind of like a trust process. Yeah.
I could add that there is a program throughout the state within the schools called mental health something.
Educationally related mental health services.
Okay. That would be a good program. That's where we try to guide people to get their hours if a school is has that kind of a program. Because then they have licensed counselors available to be supervisors. But if they're not in that kind of a program, you only have PPS credentialed supervisors.
You have other people in a school that can provide ERMs, though.
Can
School
provide
psych ERMs, is educationally related mental health services, which is used to be the responsibility of mental health agencies, and all schools used to contract with mental health agencies. That law changed and the funding stream changed a few years ago, so that those funds now come directly to schools, and schools decide whether they want to contract with outside agencies to provide those services, or whether they want to provide those services exclusively within their own, either with their own hires, using school psychologists, or whether they do both. And so you can't assume every school is going to provide ERMs, but not every school is going to necessarily have an outside contractor or provider.
Yeah. This may be different. I don't have on the tip of my tongue the name of the program.
Well, maybe.
But there would be licensed counselors to supervise our trainees or interns, either on site, or I think sometimes it's at the district level, and so they do the supervision for a cluster of schools. But then from what we can tell, they're getting the kind of internship or practicum experience that we would expect. I don't know if there'd be licensed counselors in the program you're referring to.
There could be, and it's not a program, it's a legal requirement, but I'm.
I think we're talking about something.
We're getting off on getting off on a tangent.
But I think we've got some good starting points.
Yes.
On this to bring back to the committee at the next meeting.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay.
Okay. So any other public comments? So it looks like, you know, we talked about all the recommendations and have some good pointers, you know, for the staff to draft language and stuff. And I don't think we require any actions, right? Okay. All right. So let's move forward for the next set of survey. And should we take a little break? or you want to move on? It's 1:36.
Let's just turn it
Let's just try to get it done. Okay, get it done.
Okay.
So, exempt and private practice settings, Christy?
Yeah, so this is our survey results that we have so far regarding exempt and private practice settings. Really, the more of the focus was on exempt settings, but we started the survey asking about all work settings so that we could get a handle to help inform about our discussion on trainees as well. So we have a great response so far. We've had over 1,200 responses. The survey, again, was voluntary and anonymous. We requested the participation of our licensees and registrants, as well as exempt setting agency directors. We did a link to the survey on our homepage, and we asked for some help from the professional associations, as well as the California Council of Community Behavioral Health Agencies in promoting the survey. But I want to add a caveat here. Yesterday, during the board meeting, we had some agency directors attend to talk about one of the, they were all from nonprofit agencies. They came to talk about a different topic. I approached them and said, hey, did you hear about our exempt setting committee? We're going to come tomorrow, and we didn't know what that was. And I said, have you heard of this survey? And I also asked them, are you part of this Community Behavioral Health Agencies Association? And no, none of them were. So I really feel like we need to keep this survey open and reach out to those nonprofits that we're not reaching, because it was a real eye-opener yesterday to hear about how they function out there and their struggles. And I feel like their voice needs to be heard in this survey more than what we got. So I would hope, we do have a good chunk of survey results, but I feel like before maybe we do any further exploring of the results, we need to hear from some more folks. So, and I have some thoughts on how we could, I'm sure that we can find a way to do that, to reach out.
So the suggestion is to extend the time for the survey, open it up again.
Yes.
Invite more respondents and, especially targeting those
Nonprofits.
nonprofit organization and get their feedback. I really like the idea. I really do. I think it's, especially, I concur with you guys, especially from yesterday's board meeting. I think I think it's important to invite those voices, and to give us the feedback, because I think those are the people, looks like, they do the majority, providing the settings, for the mental health services. I mean, I was reading the survey, it is very eye-opening.
Yeah. But I think before we make any further,
change.
I agree, and we did get contact information for those individuals.
I think that would be.
I agree. I think we're missing a sample demographic.
Yes.
I agree.
Yes. So, in that case, maybe we'll just,
I feel like maybe we just hold.
we don't need to. We don't need to report it.
Change.
Right. I'm thinking about, how long do you think that, you would want the survey open?
So I'll probably need a couple weeks to gather the information. You want to probably give people at least a few weeks to do their responses. So by the time of our next meeting, I think I should be able to have
something.
I mean,
more.
we don't have a date yet for our next meeting.
No, we
though,
don't.
So
here's, yes.
And then it's not on the agenda.
No, public comment.
We can do the public comments.
yeah, so I think if we set our next meeting for a few months out, that would be enough time.
Okay.
So, Christy, are you thinking February, March? So, at the other committee meeting, we had a plan A and a plan B. Maybe we do the same thing for this committee?
Yes, we can do a plan A and plan B.
Okay.
Do you want to piggyback on the same date?
I think we probably could. I still think that we can keep the meeting start time if we have to do the 16th. I think we can do the 10 a.m. And we just all understand that's Friday night, and whoever has the second half of that day is going to stay late,
and that's okay.
And maybe as I'm looking at the composition,
Since we're in Northern California, I think we should be the second half.
Yeah, so I think maybe we would just do exempt
in the
afternoon.
Of the 16th?
Of the 16th, or we piggyback on the board meeting.
The board meeting in the afternoon.
Yeah, because we're tentatively scheduled for the next board meeting for 3 days, the 21st through the 23rd. If we don't have enough petitioners, we can take one of those days, and we determined it would be the 23rd to hold the portability committee meeting, and we could put the exempt committee there as well.
So this is a possible on the 16th.
Yeah. Possible on the 16th, and you already have 21 through 23 blocked out, and I'll know in January.
So any public comments in regarding extending the survey to include more responses from the nonprofit organization? That's good. Okay. All right. So it seems that, then, we have the next meeting date and we can pretty much conclude the committee today. And so next time we will have probably we will have some language, regarding the students' practicum. And then also hopefully some results for this exempt and private setting. Wonderful. Okay, so, and then we'll move on to the next agenda item, which is the public comments. I did that, and what is the future agenda items? Any suggestion for future agenda items? Call 1, call 2, call 3? None? All right, and then I think the next item is adjourned. So the time now is 1:43. Thank you very much.
Very nice.
Yes, very nice. Wow, I've never done a meeting like we've done it.